You'll notice is a lot of traffic lights don't work. Then you might see the gas lines and bare shelves in once well-stocked pharmacies. Lebanon was a vacation spot, a tourist mecca, home to a thriving middle class. It is now in an for more than a year. NPR's Ruth Sherlock has lived and reported from there for years, and she joins us now from Beirut. Hey, Ruth.
Hey.
So, big picture, how bad is this?
Well, the World Bank says this country is now in one of the worst economic crises anywhere in the world, likely since the 1800s. So there's massive inflation, prices are soaring, but people's salaries are worth a tiny fraction of what they were. Lebanon's middle class, which used to be large, has just been gutted, Mary Louise. You know, for example, I went to this upper class neighbourhood recently and visited this church charity that was giving out food aid. And in line, waiting for that food aid, there were people in Mercedes, SUVs, BMWs, all waiting to get rice and cooking oil. And of course, all of this is so much worse for people who were already poor. The United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, says more than 70% of Lebanese now don't have enough food or enough money to buy food.
It's such an image, people driving Mercedes, and yet they're showing up to get free rice and oil. What happened? They must have had money not that long ago. What happened?
Well, you know, with the collapse of the currency, people would normally turn to their savings in dollars, and many of these people lost access to their wealth, though, overnight, because Lebanese banks froze dollar accounts to prevent a run on those banks. I spoke with Hala Dahouz. She works in advertising, but when the economic crisis hit, she started this Facebook page, Liban Troc. It was meant as a kind of bartering site for people to exchange goods. It's ballooned, and now there's 70,000 members, and she tells me that through it she's seen the impact of the economic collapse.
People who were rich are becoming the new poor. People who were like traveling 3 times a year, who are managers, university teachers, doctors, everyone is becoming poor because no one has access to any of his basic rights of his own money.
So people now use her Facebook page to ask for funds to pay hospital bills or to get help after they've been made homeless.
And I gather even people who have money to pay for medicine, there are shortages. They can't necessarily get it.
Yes, you know, the shelves are very sparsely stocked. At one pharmacy that I visited, almost every customer was turned away empty-handed. The pharmacy didn't even have the most basic painkillers. One pharmacist there, Elias Kadi, he told me what it was like to work there.
People really are crying here. They are begging us, please give us this medicine. We are need some for their blood, for example, for anticoagulation. There is no, and if they don't take it, they may die.
What about government services, electricity, fuel?
The government says it doesn't have any money, so you're seeing this in the breakdown of infrastructure. There's terribly long power cuts here, as well as the fuel shortages, but also critical entities like, for example, the Lebanese army is now relying on foreign aid handouts to provide food for its troops, and in a sign of how bad things are there, the army is also offering helicopter rides to tourists as a way of making US dollars. And, you know, there isn't a clear solution in sight here. The Prime Minister and his cabinet resigned after the massive explosion last August, and there's been a failure to form a government so far. So the government's caretaker Prime Minister is appealing to the international community for funds, but that international community has been burned in the past. They've seen help squandered through incompetence and corruption. So they want major reforms that the politicians won't implement. So Lebanon is on its own for the moment.
NPR's Ruth Sherlock there in the middle of Beirut. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, ladies.
Now new insight into the fight over critical race theory and K-12 schools. Some families, mostly white, accuse schools of teaching children to be ashamed of their race and their country. Educators argue they're simply teaching the facts of U.S. history and say they're victims in a culture war drummed up by conservative activists. Into this fight arrives a new survey of states' history standards, and it says a lot about what kids are actually learning. NPR's Corey Turner explains.
Standards are a roadmap of a state's values, leading teachers to the historical figures and events that students should know. For this new survey, reviewers rated the U.S. history and civics standards for all 50 states and Washington, D.C., giving them letter grades, A through F, for things like depth and clarity. At the top, earning A's, were Alabama, California, D.C., Massachusetts, and Tennessee. At the bottom, 10 states failed, including Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. 10 more scored no better than D's.
Unfortunately, what I found is that they tended to be broad and vague, not specific enough.
Jose Gregory has taught high school U.S. history for nearly 20 years and was one of the reviewers for the report, which comes from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Though Fordham is a conservative-leaning think tank, a handful of experts all told me the result is nonpartisan and worth taking seriously.
I'm really worried.
Hassan Kwame Jeffries teaches history at Ohio State.
If you don't teach about race and racism in American history, past and present, I don't know what the hell you're teaching. It's not the truth.
Jeffries says the fight over critical race theory is essentially about how schools teach about race and racism, and that is deeply informed by what states do and do not include in their U.S. history and civic standards. Since Fordham's last survey in 2011, reviewer Jose Gregory says states' handling of slavery and Jim Crow, as well as early Native American history, has improved, though many state standards are still vague or disjointed.
I cannot teach students about the emancipation without talking about slavery itself, right? I cannot talk about civil rights and movement for equality without discussing Jim Crow.
Stephanie Wager is past president of the National Council for the Social Studies, and she lives in Iowa, where the history standards got an F. The governor also recently signed an order there saying students should not be made to feel discomfort or guilt on account of their race. As a result, Walker says, history teachers there feel vulnerable.
They're just very scared. They don't know, does this mean I can't, teach my unit on the Civil War and we talk about slavery as one of the causes? What does this mean?
The same is true, she says, when Iowa teachers tackle the Constitution. How should they handle something like the 3/5 Compromise, which allowed states to count 3/5 of enslaved people, thereby increasing slaveholding states' political power?
How could you talk about that in any other way than to say this was all about sort of white power, maintaining systems of power?
Iowa standards don't mention the 3/5 Compromise, which could make it easier for anxious teachers to avoid it. On the other hand, Oklahoma, which got high marks for its standards, specifically says 5th graders should examine the 3/5 Compromise and understand how it helped to maintain slavery. As it happens, Oklahoma also passed a law which, like Iowa's, says students should not be made to feel discomfort based on race. The difference, though, is standards. Unlike Iowa's, Oklahoma's standards offer a clear roadmap for teachers to follow the uncomfortable facts of our history. And that new law in Oklahoma, it includes one caveat. It does not stop teachers from following those standards. Corey Turner, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
Our springs are starting to dry up on the mountain and everywhere.
The warming trend in the Southwest has left the 2 largest reservoirs in the United States at record low levels, and millions who rely on that water wonder about the future.
You're looking at a serious loss of equity in really just rural America.
A crisis along the Colorado River on the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
It's Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 on St. Louis Public Radio. Vaccination rates for white people are nearly double compared to those of Latino residents in the state of Arizona. Activists say the state has been slow to incorporate Spanish into its vaccination campaign. More in 15 minutes. 50% chance of scattered showers today with a high of 81. Tonight, isolated showers possible, down to 68 for the low. Tuesday, becoming mostly sunny with a high of 86. Right now, 85 in St. Louis, 75 in Quincy, and 74 with light rain in Rolla. News on the way from NPR. Local and regional news ahead with Maria Altman in for Marissa Ann Lewis-Thompson. Support comes from the Ascension Charity Classic presented by Emerson. Professional golf returns to Norwood Hills Country Club September 6th through the 12th. Tournament proceeds benefit local charities. Tickets available at ascensioncharityclassic.com.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. In South Florida, the search continues in the condo collapse with at least 94 people dead and some 22 still missing or unaccounted for. Surfside Mayor Charles Burkett says they are stepping up security at the site so recovery crews can preserve personal items for family members of the victims.
Given it is a very, very sort of holy site at this point because we've lost so many lives, we're going to be tightening the security around that site.
Meanwhile, the mayor of Miami-Dade County says a new round of COVID-19 tests have been administered to local officials there after a county commissioner and his chief of staff came down with flu-like symptoms and tested positive for the virus Sunday. She said all rapid tests have so far come back negative. The U.S. has imposed visa restrictions on 100 Nicaraguans affiliated with the country's embattled government. As NPR's Jackie Northam tells us, the move is intended to put pressure on President Daniel Ortega's government.
The visa restrictions are being imposed on members of the Nicaraguan National Assembly and the country's judicial system, including prosecutors and judges, along with some of their family members. The State Department has also revoked any U.S. visas held by those individuals. In a statement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said those targeted are believed to be responsible for or complicit in enabling the Ortega regime's attacks on democracy and human rights. That includes suppression of peaceful protests, human rights abuses, and passing what Blinken called repressive laws. Jackie Northam, NPR News.
Stocks finished higher on Wall Street to start the week as shares of banks rose just ahead of a wave of earnings reports expected out later this week from big companies. The Dow went up 0.3%. This is NPR.
This is St. Louis Public Radio News. It's 3:32. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Altman, in for Marissa Ann Lewis-Thompson. State health officials are warning the Delta variant is sparking large outbreaks of the coronavirus in rural parts of the state. St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Fenton reports officials are worried the virus will quickly spread to other parts of Missouri, especially areas with low vaccination rates.
Large outbreaks centered around Joplin and Springfield have contributed to Missouri's explosive growth in coronavirus cases this summer. But state health officials say other pockets of the state will likely experience a surge in cases soon as the Delta variant spreads quickly. In 16 Missouri counties, less than 20% of people have received the COVID-19 vaccine. Jennifer Roderman is a nurse at the Dent County Health Department. She's worried the variant will soon take hold there, where only 20% of the population is fully vaccinated.
The outbreak that is happening in the rest of southwest Missouri doesn't seem to be hitting us as hard. Now, it might hit us a little bit harder in the future.
Roderman says more people are getting the vaccine as news of the variant spreads. I'm Sarah Fenton, St. Louis Public Radio.
Missouri Governor Mike Parson says Missouri's status as having the 7th highest in-state migration rate in the country is a sign of a healthy economy, but that number comes from U-Haul based on their data of one-way truck rentals. University of Missouri St. Louis economics professor Max Gilman says it's not the most reliable source of information.
It can mean that you do have a healthy job market. I don't know how U-Haul computes these measures, and so of course the actual statistic and how it's computed would be important.
Gilman says there's better and more reliable statistics that show Missouri has a healthy economy. The unemployment rate is 4.2%, lower than the national average of 5.5%. Illinois will be the first state in the nation to require Asian American history units be taught in public schools. Governor
That was really good.
signed the new law last week, which will go into effect for the 2022-23 school year.
We are setting a new standard for what it means to truly reckon with our history. It's a new standard that helps us understand one another and ultimately to move ourselves closer to the nation of our ideals.
Those who push for the law also say the new curriculum is a way to build tolerance, especially after the rise of anti-Asian hate during the COVID-19 pandemic. School districts are free to decide how to implement the instructional units and how long students should spend learning the material. In our forecast tonight, isolated showers, a low around 68. Tomorrow, look for clouds, then gradually becoming sunny with a high around 86. Wednesday, sunshine, high of 93. It's 74 degrees in Rolla, 75 in Quincy. Here in St. Louis, we have 84 degrees and partly cloudy skies. I'm Maria Altman, St. Louis Public Radio News.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Audie Cornish. Cuba is one of the most tightly controlled countries in the world, which is why yesterday's demonstrations were astonishing. Across the island, thousands of people took to the streets in what appeared to be spontaneous protests. They were furious about the lack of food and medicine and power outages. The chant was Libertad, which in Spanish means freedom. NPR's Carrie Kahn has covered Cuba for many years. She joins us now from Mexico City. And Carrie, to start, as we said, people haven't seen this kind of public protest, this kind of display for almost... decades. How is the government responding?
Well, like you said, yesterday thousands were in the street in many cities throughout the country, not just in Havana, and it was overwhelming to say the least. I've never seen anything like it. There were multiple arrests, but many huge protests went on for hours. It was unprecedented. President Miguel Diaz-Canel interrupted state TV yesterday and was very defiant. He urged Cubans to take to the streets and defend their revolution against what he said were paid demonstrators. Today he was back on state TV, and I heard more of a conciliatory tone. He was clearly still defiant and went on for hours, but he did talk about legitimate concerns and gripes Cubans have. No one can deny that times are tough in Cuba. Shortages of food and fuel are real. COVID is bad, and it's summer, and it is hot in Cuba, and power is in short supply. And he said he understands the frustrations.
¿Cuál es el origen de ello? ¿Cuál es la causa? ¿Es el bloqueo?
But he said, what is the origin, the cause of all that? The blockade. That's what Cubans call the U.S. economic embargo against Cuba. The Cubans blame all the economic problems in the country on the U.S. sanctions and the embargo, and there's no doubt that is what is at the core of the problems, not the government, he said.
President Biden put out a statement today. What did he have to say?
He said that we stand with the Cuban people and their clarion call for freedom. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken seemed to be responding directly to President Diaz-Canel when he said that by blaming the U.S. for all of Cuba's problems. He said the regime isn't listening to the legitimate voice and will of the Cuban people, that they are tired of the repression that has gone on far too long.
That is what we are hearing and seeing in Cuba, and that is a reflection of the Cuban people, not of the United States or any other outside actor.
Harry, speaking of which, what has it been like trying to learn about what's happening on the island today?
It's really tough. It's really tough because the internet is totally controlled by the regime, and it appears that it has either been cut or it's very limited today. There's still videos being posted to social media, but it's unclear whether those were from today or yesterday. It's just hard to verify when and where they were shot. I reached out to a lot of my contacts on the island, and I can't get through either on social media apps or even on phone lines. I just get busy signals or phone calls just don't go through. But I just want to stress that these protests didn't come out of nowhere. Yes, these are the biggest we've seen in decades, but this has been such a very difficult year in Cuba. COVID has really devastated the island's economy. It shut down Cuba's tourism industry. The economy contracted by 11% last year and even more this year. Power is very unreliable. People have to stand in line for hours for basic food. And the government opened these dollar stores where people can buy certain items, but no one earns dollars on the island, and that has created a lot of anger. And also over the last year, a group of artists began protesting for freedom of expression, and they were harshly repressed. There is a lot of pent-up frustration that we're seeing expressed these days.
That's NPR's Carrie Kahn. Thanks for your reporting.
You're welcome.
To Northern Ireland now. It's come a long way since the Troubles, the civil conflict that cost more than 3,600 lives.
From the top of the flats, shot him in the head.
Duffy, 29, was in elementary school when the Troubles ended. He wants to see a united Ireland. But like the vast majority here, he absolutely does not want to go back to the violence of the 1970s and 1980s.
I've been a major recipient of the peace dividend. My family are from a very working class community, and I went on and become a lawyer.
A human rights lawyer. While some here are still shaped by the Troubles, polls show more and more people no longer define themselves in the binary language of division, Protestant versus Catholic, British Union nationalist. As Northern Ireland navigates the impact of Brexit and an uncertain future, many think that post-conflict identity is its greatest hope. Frank Langford, NPR News, Larne, Northern Ireland.
And tomorrow on All Things Considered, hear about the challenges in trying to cut a greenhouse gas that's far more potent than carbon dioxide. Tell your smart speaker to play NPR or your station by name. You're listening to All Things Considered. In Arizona, COVID-19 vaccination rates for Latinos are only about half of what they are for white residents. Civil rights advocates say the state hasn't moved quickly enough to provide vaccine information in Spanish. Angela Gervasi with member station KNAU in Flagstaff reports.
Kristen Urquiza grew up in Maryvale. It's in Phoenix, but she describes it as a little New York.
On my mom's street, we have folks from El Salvador, people on the right-hand side that are from Mexico.
The pandemic hit Maryvale hard. Urquiza's father died from the virus last summer. In one Maryvale zip code, a little over a third of the population has been vaccinated. A half-hour drive away, in the wealthier, whiter suburb of Sun City West, it's more than 81%. Urquiza runs the nonprofit Marked by COVID, which is affiliated with the Democratic fundraising platform Act Blue.
I don't think we did what we needed to do to ensure that that basic information was available in a language that was accessible to the people who are most in harm's way.
There is Spanish language information about the pandemic in Arizona, but it's been slow to roll out. The state health department didn't offer online vaccine registration in Spanish until February, 2 months after registration started. The department says it was a configuration issue. In those early months, the state established large-scale vaccination sites, stadiums, and arenas, but critics say they weren't accessible to all Spanish-speaking communities. People had trouble getting time off work, for example. Dr. Kara Christ is the director of the Department of Health Services.
Our mass vaccination sites were really only one part of the strategy. We always were looking to do community-based vaccination sites.
She says the state has partnered with local groups to launch those sites, but she adds,
Arizona is a decentralized public health system, and so the counties really are responsible for the vaccination efforts in their areas.
2 hours north of Phoenix in Flagstaff, the county health department held a clinic with a local church and interfaith organization. Here, there's a medical interpreter and Spanish-speaking volunteers like Nelly Navarro. Navarro says information is key. She had her own doubts before getting the shot. Now she's glad she did. She feels safe hugging her mother again.
Para mí, recibir la vacuna es como esa seguridad de que ya puedo abrazar a mi mamá.
Lydia Guzman says holding clinics at familiar spaces can help eliminate distrust or fear. She's with Chicanos por la Causa, a social justice nonprofit. She says it's also crucial to allow local leaders to encourage the vaccine.
The faith leaders, the teachers, the local doctors, the state, they're doing a lot. Could they have done more? I would say that they could have done more, but sooner. The fact that we're playing catch-up is sad.
Lately, the state health department has targeted certain communities with cell phone alerts, inviting people to a Spanish language town hall about vaccination. Guzman says it's a good idea for a demographic that tends to utilize texting and WhatsApp.
If you can get a message in, just like the Amber Alert or something like that, into your phone, this is a great way to give and deliver a message to a hard-to-reach population.
Other activists agree it's a useful tactic, but think the state needs to use it more frequently, saying the messages need to be repeated to be effective. That's not a problem in some Arizona counties like Santa Cruz, where Spanish is more widely spoken. Many healthcare workers here are bilingual, and it has among the state's highest vaccination rates. For NPR News, I'm Angela Gervasi in Flagstaff.
And you're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
We'll get the latest read on inflation come Tuesday, but the way we measure housing inflation, it's probably not what you'd expect.
That's where we have to ask this question. If
you were to rent your house, how much could it rent for?
Oh yeah, my answer definitely to that one's going to be higher than it should be. I'm Connor Brisdell. How we keep track of housing prices next time on Marketplace.
Don't miss Marketplace tonight starting at 6 on St. Louis Public Radio. U.S. troops are withdrawing from Afghanistan. Now it's up to Afghan forces to retain control.
We want to continue fighting. If a city falls, we will attack from another city. If a district falls, we will attack from the cities. We will never give up.
The commanding general of the Afghan army on how it's going. That's in 15 minutes on All Things Considered. Thank you for listening. I'm Charlie McDonald. If you haven't tried listening to St. Louis Public Radio with your smart speaker, it's very easy. Just say, play St. Louis Public Radio, and you'll be connected to our live stream. It's the same news and programming you hear when you listen to the radio, and all it takes is a simple voice command. Support comes from Manor Grove Nursing Care in Kirkwood, celebrating more than a century of compassionate senior care. Information on tours at manorgrove.com. Landmark for quality care and rehab. Advantage Credit Union, offering assistance with the car buying experience from pre-approval and comprehensive financing options to indirect dealer network access. Details at vcu.com. You're listening to St. Louis Public Radio.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. For more than 40 years, one of the biggest influences on American politics has been the ideology known as neoliberalism. It holds that markets, not government, can solve most of society's problems, and it emphasizes personal responsibility. Neoliberalism has become so pervasive, it's reshaped the kind of relationships ordinary Americans have to their government and to each other. Producer Lane Kaplan Levinson of NPR's history podcast Throughline has more.
It's 1992. Republicans have been in the White House for 12 years. First with Ronald Reagan, then George H.W. Bush. This has the Democratic Party looking inward, wondering why they keep losing. They decide that some of their core values and policies, some of them dating back to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, things like welfare, labor unions, and government oversight, are bringing them down. And they want to win.
Bill Clinton is part of this orbit of Democrats.
This is Lily Geismer, a professor of history at Claremont McKenna College.
He's the governor of Arkansas. He becomes governor quite young, and he's trying to kind of bring in new solutions.
The Democrats see Clinton as a new beginning for them, and so they nominate him with the hopes of leading the party to victory.
Bill Clinton wins in 1992, wins back a lot of the kind of white moderate suburbanites and white class and working class voters who've been kind of drifting towards the Republican Party.
This election is a clarion call for our country to face the challenges of the end of the Cold War and the beginning of the next century. To restore growth to our country and opportunity to our people. To empower our own people so that they can take more responsibility for their own lives.
So many of the bills have the word responsibility in them because there's this idea of like government will be responsible in some ways, but like it's a reciprocal relationship and people have to be responsible for themselves.
So like we'll help you, but only up to a point. Then you're on your own. But you'll be better off because you'll be able to make more money that way than living off a government handout. This thinking basically describes Clinton's signature welfare for work reform, which pulled the plug on welfare services after 2 years.
It gives us a chance we haven't had before to break the cycle of dependency that has existed for millions and millions of our fellow citizens, exiling them from the world of work, and give structure, meaning, and dignity to most of our lives.
Another famous nail in the coffin of neoliberalism passed under Clinton is the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act.
Glass-Steagall was a signature law of the New Deal era, created in direct response to the 1929 stock market crash. The main goal of the act was to not let that ever happen again by severing ties between banking and investing activities. But when key provisions of the law were repealed under Clinton to boost the economy, his message was loud and clear.
The era of big government is over.
And so you have a Democratic president saying that, and that sounds very similar to what Ronald Reagan was saying.
Government is not the solution to our problem. government is the problem.
I say again,
The era of big government is over.
By the 1990s, the Democratic and Republican parties seemed to be moving in lockstep, at least when it came to economic policy. And after Clinton, the next Democratic president would pick up right where he left off.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
I think in many ways Obama's policies were a continuation of the kind of Clinton approach. Many of the people who were in the Clinton White House came back under Obama, and many of the programs that the Obama administration adopted were very pro-market and particularly pro-Wall Street.
President Obama was all about the marketplace, whether it came to healthcare, because the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is a marketplace for healthcare, or schools, because like Clinton, he was a huge charter school advocate, and also like Clinton, Obama was all about the hustle.
We should support everyone who's willing to work, and every risk taker and entrepreneur who aspires to become the next Steve Jobs. Both parties agree on these ideas. So put them in a bill and get it on my desk this year.
He made regular visits to Silicon Valley and teased Mark Zuckerberg like an old friend.
My name is Barack Obama, and I'm the guy who got Mark to wear a jacket and tie.
Republican and Democratic presidents talking about free markets, deregulation, individual responsibility, opportunity. These are all values inspired by this thing we call neoliberalism, a worldview and set of practices that these presidents may not have outright called themselves by, but nonetheless has shaped their policies, making these rival political parties look more alike than different. And that's changed our society, our culture. Lily Geismer sees this on college campuses every day, where students are consumed by this idea of entrepreneurship and see the appeal of working for yourself, depending on yourself, even if that means driving for a rideshare service like Lyft or Uber.
You're in charge of yourself and that you're your own actor and that there's not this sort of seeking it, looking out for you, and that you're somehow like empowered by that experience of like setting your own hours. So the other side of that is that you don't have the kind of typical protections in place, that you have no job security, you have no overtime, you have no health benefits. We're all doing lots of work, and the idea that we're like more empowered by it, but like in fact it's like it's creating other kinds of precarity and stress.
The reality is, we live in a country that's fully embraced the idea that the market can solve most of our problems. It's part of our national identity, and according to UC Berkeley poli-sci professor Wendy Brown, it's creeped into our own personal identities and has gotten inside our own heads.
You might think, well, I could take a vacation, but that would actually depreciate my chances of being noticed in the following 6 ways at work or in the dating scene or something like that, and it might depreciate my value in those domains, so this is not the right thing to do. Now, what's happened there? What's happened is that you have a human being who is thinking about everything they do in terms of their human capital value being enhanced or depreciated.
Brown says this way of thinking has been creeping into our society and politics for the past 40 or so years, and it's only recently that she sees us possibly moving in a new direction.
What we see now is a pretty big turn away from economic fundamentals of neoliberalism. And Biden said it explicitly.
My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked.
That was the first real shot across the bow against Reaganomics that we have had from a presidential podium in 40 years. And that is a hard turn against neoliberalism. But digging it out of the culture, that's another story.
And that story from producer Lane Kaplan-Levinson of the NPR podcast Throughline. You can hear the whole episode wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to All Things Considered.
Support for NPR comes from this station
And from Waystar, on a journey to transform healthcare payments. Waystar's technology is designed to help healthcare providers streamline the revenue cycle so they can focus on what's most important. More at waystar.com. From DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer private search and tracker blocking with one download. DuckDuckGo. Privacy simplified. From Capital One with the Saver Card, for various uses from dining and entertainment to streaming and grocery stores. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. We're 90.7 KWMU St. Louis, 90.3 WQUB Quincy, and 88.5 KMST Rolla, broadcasting in HD from the University of Missouri St. Louis at Grand Center, with local and regional news online at stlpr.org. I'm Charlie McDonald. Find local news that holds the powerful to account, makes the abstract concrete, and shares the authentic voices of our community from the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom direct to you, online at stlpr.org. Support comes from BioSTL, a national leader in innovation, building a purpose-driven economy that has the potential to feed the world, heal the sick, and reduce health inequities. Visit biostl.org/impact.
There is a sense of abandonment amongst the Afghans from when the U.S. left.
On the day the top U.S. general in Afghanistan steps down, we hear reaction from an Afghan general on the front lines.
For Monday, July 12th, this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Audie Cornish. Ahead this hour, we remember Edwin Edwards, the larger-than-life former governor of Louisiana.
He was a bad boy, and people loved him for it. He, just the ultimate rogue of a politician.
Also with Haiti in crisis, we look at the recent history of peacekeeping operations there.
And what help Haiti needs now to stop a dangerous situation from getting worse.
They want an international team to help to resolve the problem, but also to reform the Haitian police. The situation right now, it's unbearable.
And a lawsuit over a contract for new post-delivery trucks.
Now this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. President Biden is supporting growing protests in Cuba. As NPR's Scott Detrow reports, Biden released a statement this morning saying he stands with the Cuban people, whom he says are standing up for fundamental rights.
The statement from the White House comes a day after thousands of Cubans protested economic woes and other issues on the island, including the handling of the pandemic. President Biden expressed support for the demonstrators. Biden framed the marches as a stand against, quote, decades of repression and economic suffering at the hands of Cuba's government. Biden urged Cuban leaders to, quote, hear their people and serve their needs at this vital moment rather than enriching themselves. The Cuban government has tried to dismiss earlier U.S. support for the protests. After a State Department official posted a similar encouragement on Twitter, a Cuban official responded that the U.S. has been, quote, involved to their necks in promoting social and political instability in Cuba. Scott Detrow, NPR News, the White House.
2 firefighters died in a plane crash while surveying a wildfire in Arizona over the weekend. Mountain West News Bureau's Nate Hedgie reports severe weather may have played a role.
The two men were firefighting veterans, 48-year-old pilot Matt Miller and 62-year-old U.S. Forest Service employee Jeff Pachura. They both died Saturday after their plane crashed while surveying the Cedar Basin fire in northwestern Arizona. It had sparked the day prior. Bureau of Land Management spokesperson Dolores Garcia says multiple federal agencies are investigating the crash.
This time of year we do have thunderstorms and very turbulent weather in the area. That's one of the factors investigators will be looking through when trying to determine what happened.
Early and record-breaking heat and high winds across the West are fueling one of the most severe wildfire seasons in a decade. For NPR News, I'm Nate Hedgie.
Drug maker Pfizer is meeting this week with government officials to discuss authorization of a third shot of the company's COVID-19 vaccine. As NPR's Joe Palco reports, health officials booster shots may be needed.
Federal health officials have taken pains to point out that the current vaccines remain effective at preventing illness caused by the coronavirus. At the same time, they admit that someday boosters could be needed, a contingency the government has been planning for, and various studies are underway to test a variety of booster strategies to see which would be most effective.
NPR's Joe Palca. Another potential setback for the single-shot Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, with federal regulators expected to announce a new warning on the vaccine, potentially related to a rare autoimmune disorder. According to a report by the Washington Post, about 100 preliminary reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome have been detected in the U.S. following vaccination with the J&J shot, mostly in men over the age of 50. On Wall Street, stocks gained ground. The Dow up 126 points today. The Nasdaq rose 31 points. The S&P was up 15 points. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, supporting those working towards a day when no one has to choose between paying rent, putting food on the table, and protecting their health and the health of others. rwjf.org.
This is St. Louis Public Radio News. It's 4:04. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Altman, in for Marissa Ann Lewis-Thompson. Coronavirus cases are on the rise again in St. Louis County. Over the last 2 weeks, the infection rate has risen by 63%. County Executive Sam Page attributes the upsurge to the Delta coronavirus variant spreading across Missouri.
The symptoms commonly associated with the Delta variant, including headaches, runny nose, and a sore throat, are somewhat different than those associated with the Alpha variant of COVID.
The St. Louis County Health Department encourages anyone experiencing those symptoms to get tested immediately, especially unvaccinated residents who are at the highest risk of being infected. The county plans on announcing a vaccine incentive program later this week. Millions of rural residents across the Midwest are at risk of nitrate contamination in their drinking water and may not know about it. Harvest Public Media's Dana Cronin reports on the lack of testing in rural well water.
The few surveys that have been done to test for nitrate concentrations in drinking water have been alarming. Some results in Illinois came back with up to 9 times the safe drinking water standard. That's according to a new report from environmental nonprofit Prairie Rivers Network. Katie Gregg helped write the report and says excessive nitrate levels can have severe human health impacts.
Nitrate has no taste, no smell, no color.
Navigate to Fairview Heights Metrolink station.
Whether it's contaminated or not.
Nitrates mostly run off of fertilizer-laden agricultural land, making rural areas particularly vulnerable to contamination. I'm Dana Cronin, Harvest Public Media.
And in our forecast, isolated showers tonight with a low around 68. Tomorrow we'll have clouds in the morning, then sunshine in the afternoon with a high around 86. And midweek, Wednesday, sunny, high of 93. Right now it's 74 in Rolla, 76 in Quincy, and 81 here in St. Louis. I'm Maria Altman, St. Louis Public Radio News.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. We begin this hour with a high-profile departure. General Scott Miller, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, stepped down today. Another milestone in ending America's 2 decades of war there. NPR Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman has covered the war for all of those 20 years. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Mary Louise.
Give me some context on where this leaves U.S. operations. The latest is all U.S. troops out by August 31st, and until then, the CENTCOM commander in Florida takes over the mission?
That's right, Mary Louise. For the first time now, a general based outside the country, General Frank McKenzie, will have the authority to mount airstrikes against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State targets in Afghanistan, and it's possible there could also be airstrikes in support of the Afghan military fighting the Taliban. There were some back in May, but overall, Mary Louise, the Americans want the Afghan Air Force to handle that job.
Well, Tom Bowman, stay with us, because next I want to bring in some reaction to this news today, to General Miller's departure, from an Afghan general. This is Sami Sadat, commanding general of the Afghan army. Now, I first spoke to him a few months ago, and back then, this was April, he was optimistic. He told me even as U.S. forces pulled out that Afghan forces would not collapse. That was April, and in the weeks since then, some Afghan forces have in fact surrendered. The Taliban has seized a third, maybe more, of the country's 400 provincial districts. So today we called General Sadat back to get an update on how he sees the fight. General Sadat, it's good to speak to you again. Where exactly have we caught you today?
Thank you, Mary Louise. I'm in Nimruz province in southwestern Afghanistan, just a couple of kilometers off the Iranian borders, and towards the west and towards the south of where I am is 150 kilometers Pakistani border. So this is not the best place to be right now.
I'm looking at a map, so you're a little bit west of where we spoke to you last time, which was Helmand province. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Still a very dangerous part of a very dangerous country. What is the update? What is the security situation where you are?
In Nimruz province, we have had some clashes between the Afghan forces and the Taliban, and unfortunately we have open border with Pakistan and open border with Iran. So there is this wave of the Taliban moving in from Pakistan on Nimruz province, and then there's the Iranian facilitators who are getting material support and direction from Iran to attack the Afghan forces. And they have been very active equipping and preparing and trying to overrun some district centers. We did lose one district center in Nimruz. That's why I'm here to take it back. We're preparing a couple of operations to clear some of the pockets in the villages where the Taliban have managed to place themselves, and then my mission will be completed from here.
Just to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying there are Taliban fighters crossing the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan, and that's part of who your forces are fighting now?
That's correct. So my corps is located in southwestern Afghanistan, where I have around 300-kilometer border with Pakistan and then 330 kilometer with Iran. So literally we are in the middle of two countries' proxy war, and we're fighting. From Pakistan, the Taliban crossed armed with a lot of IEDs and landmines and vehicles and other means. There's a number of Al-Qaeda fighters coming into Afghanistan recently. I've never seen so much Al-Qaeda fighters in my area of responsibility. There's been this resurgence of Al-Qaeda battle groups coming back to life, creating like radio communication centers, creating facilitation nodes to support some of the Taliban fighters. And I think what they're trying to do is to recruit more like Punjabi and extremist elements from Pakistan and then facilitate them into the Taliban ranks.
So this is very active fighting. Your forces are engaged every day.
Oh yeah, so 2 nights ago, where I am right now, 1,000 Taliban from Farah province, from across western Afghanistan, made a push on one of our brigade headquarters. The battle was very intense. In the first few minutes, they conducted 3 vehicle-borne IED attacks on our soldiers. Unfortunately, I have had casualties and injuries on my side. Of course, they have failed and many of them got killed, but this is the fight of today. You would see massing of Taliban into 1,000 in southwestern Afghanistan and then making a run for some of our forces.
Why are some Afghan forces surrendering to the Taliban, and sometimes without a fight?
I think, Mary Louise, there is a sense of abandonment amongst the Afghans from when the US left. They feel abandoned and left alone. The other reason is the massive propaganda conducted by the Taliban. It's playing into their air. The third reason is really logistical support. Afghanistan is a very large country. The territory is very big. Conducting ground operations to resupply some of your areas. The terrain is very bad. So in my assessment, there's 3 things have been like the main reason why some of the forces couldn't hold their ground. But this is not in a scale that would worry some of the strategic locations of Afghanistan. So Afghan forces are still holding.
Are they? I mean, I am seeing reports that the Taliban has seized a third of the country's provincial districts.
I think district centers have been seized, but a lot of the strategic assets like the hydropower dams, the urban areas, the economic centers is still with the Afghan forces. There was worry.
Does the Taliban
about it.
have they not made huge gains along the borders, including the border with Iran, close to where you are?
Not in my area of responsibility, but they have made some gains in Farah and Herat province, and that was quickly retaken by some of the local leaders, accompanying the security forces. In Farah, we still have a large area of our border with Iran controlled by the Taliban, but they're seeing people moving in to take that back.
I want to follow on something you said, which is you think one factor here is Afghan forces feeling abandoned. You and I are speaking on a day where we saw General Miller, the top U.S. general in Afghanistan, step down. The U.S. is now saying all U.S. forces will be out by August 31st. How does it feel to you? Do you feel like you're on your own in this fight now?
I kind of do, and I kind of felt that when the Taliban and the U.S. agreement came to fruition, and the limitation of the airstrikes, and I will miss them, and I said this in my last interview as well. I have some of my best friends, some of my best battle comrades, but I understand they have their own country, I have my own country, they have other things to do in the world, and I need to be responsible for what we're doing here.
Despite your efforts, if things get worse instead of better, if the worst comes to pass and your government falls, what responsibility do you think the U.S. bears?
Well, I don't think for a second that our government will fall, and of course, things are at stake and they're dangerous, and I think we have lost part of our country and some of our districts. We want to fight back from our cities. We want to remobilize in our cities and go back and attack.
And I'm asking that in part because you'll have seen the reports of U.S. intelligence estimates saying Kabul could fall in as soon as 6 months after U.S. forces are fully out.
I disagree with that assessment. I believe Kabul will become much more stronger in the next few months. The central government is linked with the communities, and people will grow stronger. There is a possibility that some of our cities may fall into the hands of the Taliban, but we want to continue fighting. If a city falls, we will attack from another city. If a district falls, we will attack from the cities. We will never give up. We will continue to fight, and I think it's only time that we will convince the rest of the world that we could win this fight and we should win this fight.
That is Commanding General of the Afghan Army, Samuel Sadat, speaking to us from the front lines there in southwestern Afghanistan. General Sadat, thanks for being with us again.
Thank you, Mary Louise.
And NPR's Tom Bowman is still here, was listening along to the General. And Tom, I wonder what you make of General Sadat's comments on the state of the fight. On the one hand, you heard there, pure determination. He says they're going to keep fighting. He's optimistic the government will hold. On the other hand, his forces are engaged in heavy combat every day.
Right. A general in his tough position, I suppose, has to remain optimistic. And it's noteworthy what he said, Mary Louise, about more Al-Qaeda fighters coming in. And of course, large numbers of Taliban coming across from Pakistan. That's been a real problem from the beginning, those safe havens in Pakistan. Now, local news reports are less optimistic. They're saying the provincial capital where the general is fighting, Lashkar, is being pressed by the Taliban. That's one of 10 urban areas around the country being threatened. A very troubling situation.
All right, and would mark a turning point perhaps in the battle there if the Taliban is turning its sights literally on the cities of Afghanistan. What are you watching for in these coming days and weeks?
Well, the big thing, Mary Louise, is will the Afghan Air Force be able to provide airstrikes to General Sadat and other commanders? That's an urgent need. The other thing is General Sadat is bringing local militias into the fight with him. He's training them as part of his army, and some of the warlords around the country are also getting their militias ready, maybe fighting independent of the Afghan army, and that could be important in holding some of the urban areas now under Taliban threat.
And also making those battle lines even more complex and complicated than they already were.
Absolutely.
And NPR's Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
President Biden is planning a major speech on voting rights tomorrow as Democrats struggle to fight Republican bills restricting voting in many states. Come back tomorrow morning for a look at the president's limited options to protect voting rights. You are listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
It's 4:18. The Texas House Democratic Caucus has confirmed that Democrats have fled the state in an effort to block Republican voting restrictions from advancing in a special legislative session. Hear more in just 20 minutes on All Things Considered. For forecast, we have a 50% chance of scattered showers today with a high of 81. Some isolated showers in the forecast tonight, down to 68. Mostly sunny on Tuesday with a high of 86. Right now, light rain in Rolla with 70. It's partly cloudy in Quincy with 76. And some clouds in St. Louis with 81. Every 2 seconds, someone in the U.S. needs blood. That's 30 people every minute. Just 1 hour of your time can make all the difference in the world to one of those people. Please consider donating blood at the St. Louis Public Radio Red Cross Blood Drive, Wednesday, July 21st, from 1 to 6 at St. Louis Public Radio. Appointments are available at stlpr.org/events, or you can call 1-800-RED-CROSS. Support comes from Marie de Villa Senior Living, helping families plan for all stages of retirement by offering options from independent villas to all-inclusive skilled nursing. Details at mariedevilla.com. And from Niche Food Group, supplying online ordering to go and dine-in options at Brasserie and Pastaria, with lunch carry-out available from Pastaria Deli and Wine. nichefoodgroup.com. This is St. Louis Public Radio.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Subaru with the 2021 Subaru Forester, featuring standard symmetrical all-wheel drive and safety technology. Love, it's what makes Subaru Subaru. Learn more at Subaru.com. From Indeed with Instant Match, a hiring tool instantly delivering to businesses a list of candidates whose resumes on Indeed match the job description. Learn more at Indeed.com/credit. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Audie Cornish. A populist firebrand and four-term Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards died today at the age of 93. NPR's Debbie Elliott reports Edwards' political reign was legendary, as was his corruption and fall from power.
Edwin Edwards was the last of the larger-than-life populists who once dominated Louisiana politics, the Huey Long mold. He built his career on political patronage, public works, and sheer force of personality.
I'm of the people. I'm common. I'm ordinary. I don't speak good English yet.
Even at age 87, trying to stage a political comeback, the French Creole Edwards was still explaining his reputation for womanizing.
People talk about me, and out of that came things like Silver Zipper, and I like to say, well, maybe so, but now it's Rusty Zipper.
Edwin Washington Edwards, a child of the Depression, represented Cajun country in Congress starting in 1965 after a stint in the state Senate. He was elected governor of Louisiana in 1972, the first of an unprecedented 4 terms spanning 3 decades and marked by scandal.
He was a bad boy, and people loved him for it. He, just the ultimate rogue of a politician.
New Orleans political columnist Stephanie Gray says Edwards was the end of a line of Southern New Deal Democrats.
The people with the big personalities who appealed often to the less well-off voters, big government people, maybe had this philosophy that, you took care of people and you skimmed a little off for yourself and that was okay.
Edwards funded hospitals, schools, and was among the first elected officials in Louisiana to bring African Americans into the political fold. Quick-witted and a dapper dresser, Edwards was known for gambling trips to Vegas and hosting poker games in the governor's mansion. Despite repeated allegations of corruption that netted those around for a time above the fray, able to navigate an ethical tightrope even with the feds on his trail. Ever confident, he famously quipped the only way he'd get beat was if he was caught with a
dead woman or a live boy. But even at that, I don't know if I'd have lost had I been caught. However, there was no chance they could ever catch me in either situation.
He did lose in 1987 to a good government candidate, but was back 4 years later in a contest against former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke that garnered national attention. Bumper stickers proclaimed, "Vote for the crook, it's important." Voters obliged, and Edwards won a record 4th term in 1991.
Tonight, Louisiana became first to turn back the merchant of hate, the master of deceit.
But federal prosecution loomed. Edwards was caught in an extortion scheme, soliciting bribes to steer riverboat casino licenses to the high bidders. A jury convicted him in 2000.
I regret that it has ended this way, but that is the system. I lived 72 years of my life within the system. I'll spend the rest of my life within the system.
He served 8 years. When he got out, he married his 3rd wife, a prison pen pal more than 50 years younger. Ever in the spotlight, the couple and their infant son starred in a short-lived and widely panned reality TV show called The Governor's Wife. Edwin Edwards attempted political redemption in 2014, running for Congress.
It's in my blood. Old doctors don't want to quit. Old farmers don't want to quit. We feel fulfilled doing what we think we were called to do. And my calling has been public life.
But his populist formula felt like a relic in the modern political climate, and Edwards lost to a Republican candidate. As if trying to salvage his legacy, Edwards would wind down his stump speech that year, saying, "I'd like your vote, but I'd rather have your respect." Debbie Elliott, NPR News.
Well, earlier this year, the U.S. Postal Service announced it had chosen a new delivery truck to replace its current aging trucks. Now, that contract, which could be worth $3 billion, is being challenged by members of Congress and the company that lost out in the bidding. NPR's Brian Naylor reports.
In February, to great fanfare, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced plans to finally replace the Postal Service's fleet of gas-guzzling, unair-conditioned, and fire-prone delivery trucks.
I am happy I could move the ball across the goal line with this project, and I am honored to celebrate this win today. Today is a major step forward for the Postal Service.
The builder of the new delivery trucks would be Oshkosh, a defense contractor with a lot of experience making things like armored trucks for the military, but less experience building delivery vehicles. In fact, according to a lawsuit filed by Workhorse, which lost the contract, Oshkosh has never made an electric delivery vehicle. Workhorse does. That's just one of the charges Workhorse has made in its legal protest of the Postal Service's decision to go with Oshkosh. Democratic Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur of Ohio also has a problem with the Oshkosh contract.
My concern is that they don't lead America into the future.
That's because the Postal Service has said that 90% of the new Oshkosh delivery vehicles would be gasoline-powered and only 10% would be electric vehicles unless Congress provides it with some money. Kaptur says that's moving in the wrong direction.
When you're going to be buying that level of vehicle, over 165,000 vehicles, and only 10% of them are green, 16,000 out of 165,000, that doesn't really make sense to me. And it's very backward looking.
Kaptur and 2 other Ohio Democrats have written President Biden asking him to review the Oshkosh contract. Workhorse, meantime, is asking a federal court to overturn the contract. It says it was unfairly penalized by the Postal Service because one of its prototypes rolled out of control during testing, something the company says was the Postal Service driver's fault for not putting the truck in park. And it charges that the Postal Service, quote, put its thumb on the scale against Workhorse.
Jack Horan, an attorney who practices and teaches government procurement law, says that it might be hard for the company to prove such a bias.
For those type of allegations, it's an especially high hurdle because the courts presume that government officials are acting in good faith and require a significant amount of proof to establish bad faith and bias.
For its part, the Postal Service says it does not comment on active litigation. Rand says the agency's quasi-independent status also means it's governed by a different set of rules.
It's not covered by the usual procurement regulations that apply to federal agencies. So as a result of that, the Postal Service has more discretion, business discretion, and leeway in handling its procurements than other government agencies.
Oshkosh says it can't comment on the suit, but that it looks forward to, quote, getting these highly capable vehicles into the hands of mail carriers. It says it can deliver any mix of gas-powered or electric vehicles the Postal Service orders, and the company also announced it intends to build them at a new plant in South Carolina. Taylor, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
Our springs are starting to dry up on the mountain and everywhere.
The warming trend in the Southwest has left the two largest reservoirs in the United States at record low levels, and millions who rely on that water wonder about the future.
You're looking at a serious loss of equity in really just rural America.
A crisis along the Colorado River. Tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
It's Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 on St. Louis Public Radio. Coming up, Ari Shapiro talks with Violet Cuppersmith about Build Your House Around My Body. It's the story of a woman's disappearance in Vietnam, populated by vengeful but not always scary ghosts. That's in 20 minutes on All Things Considered from NPR News. Support comes from Mansions on the Plaza, luxury apartments with designer finishes, spacious floor plans, and resort-like amenities on Del Mar and 170. Mansions on the Plaza, the perfect place to live. And the Ascension Charity Classic, presented by Emerson. Professional golf returns to Norwood Hills Country Club September 6th through the 12th. Tournament proceeds benefit local charities. Tickets available at ascensioncharityclassic.com.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. As dozens of wildfires rage across the western U.S., forecasters are predicting a gradual decrease in extreme temperatures later this week. Bob Oravak with the National Weather Service says there were several records broken in many places from California to Utah over the weekend.
We had 110 degrees at Merced, California, 114 at Fresno, 112 degrees at Hanford. Then we had a record high temperature of 104 in Salt Lake City.
Two of the largest wildfires burning across the West are here in California and Oregon, as another heat wave puts a strain on power grids. Fire crews are battling extreme temperatures as they try to contain a fire raging along the Nevada state line that's burned about 140 square miles. Meanwhile, the Bootleg fire in Oregon has scorched about 240 square miles so far. The top U.S. envoy for Israeli-Palestinian affairs is in the Middle East for the first time since Israel's new prime minister took office. NPR's Daniel Estrin reports from Jerusalem.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Hadi Amr is in Israel and the West Bank this week, after Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett took office last month. Bennett's office says the Prime Minister will not be meeting with Amr. His visit comes as international mediators are still trying to negotiate a way to begin reconstruction in the Gaza Strip after the conflict in May between the Israeli military and Gaza militants. Israeli warplanes damaged roads and homes in Gaza, and the World Bank, United Nations, and European Union estimate that Gaza needs $485 million to rebuild over the next couple of years. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Jerusalem.
Stocks finished modestly higher on Wall Street as shares of banks rose ahead of a wave of quarterly earnings reports out later this week from several big companies. Dow gained 126 points. This is NPR.
This is St. Louis Public Radio News. It's 4:32. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Altman, in for Marissa and Lewis Thompson. Missouri Governor Mike Parson is using a number of statistics as talking points about the health of the state's economy. St. Louis Public Radio's Jonathan Ahl reports economists see mixed value in the numbers.
Parson cites the state unemployment rate of 4.2% and being 7th in the nation in migration to the state among his proof of economic vitality. University of Missouri St. Louis economics professor Max Gilman says the unemployment number is valid and good.
That's probably the most important statistic. And with Missouri down into the 4 range, that's very, very good after this pandemic.
But some of the other numbers have less validity. Researchers at the University of California debunked U-Haul's ranking of migration into states. The researchers found the net gain of one-way rentals of U-Haul trucks entering versus leaving a state was not a viable number to calculate migration. I'm Jonathan Ahl, St. Louis Public Radio.
Infectious disease experts say COVID-19 is again a serious threat for many parts of Missouri. The Delta variant has fueled infection outbreaks in the southern part of the state, but Missouri health officials are worried it may soon spread to more rural counties. Fewer than 20% of people in some counties have received the vaccine. Doctors say if the new variant takes hold in those counties, there's not much to stop the virus from spreading. Dr. Shefali Wolf is Assistant Director of Infectious Diseases at SSM Health. She says the system's hospital staff is preparing for a surge in patients across the state.
We've started to see an uptick in our percent positive tests, and we know from last year that we typically start to see the uptick in positive tests first, and then hospitalizations lag about 2 weeks behind.
40% of Missourians have been fully vaccinated against the virus. Missouri Department of Conservation officials say they're on the lookout for an unusual or unexplained deaths among the state's wild birds. At least 9 states, including Kentucky and Indiana, have reported a mysterious illness that's killing songbirds. So far, Missouri officials say they have not observed any strange sicknesses or deaths, but they're asking residents to report if they do see groups of dead birds. It's 70 degrees in Rolla with some light rain, 81 degrees here in St. Louis. I'm Maria Altman, St. Louis Public Radio News.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Cyber Reason, a cybersecurity company dedicated to helping enterprises stop ransomware. While attackers hold businesses to ransom, Cyber Reason works to protect them. More at cyberreason.com/ransom. And from your part-time controller, specializing in nonprofit accounting. Your part-time controller helps nonprofit organizations with their accounting needs, remotely or in person. More at yourparttimecontroller.com.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Audie Cornish. A team of U.S. officials is now helping Haiti investigate who killed the country's president last week. But despite calls from Haiti's interim government for security assistance, the U.S. is not currently pledging military support. Security is the top issue for many Haitians right now, according to Yves Rumbold. He's director of communications for Policité, a public policy think tank in Haiti. He says many Haitians remain suspicious of international peacekeeping intervention. But he also rarely leaves his house because street violence has grown drastically in the last 3 years.
Well, it is mostly gangs against gangs, but also gangs against the population. Because last week, there was a nurse who was helping someone in an ambulance and she was shot to death. And this is a true fear because so many people have died. We have, for the last 3 years, at least 470 people that have died due to the violence and massacres in the neighborhoods, and 83 people have disappeared. So it's not like only because of the political vacuum. We are not sure if the national police can stand against the gangs.
Can you talk about what international peacekeeping efforts have been like in Haiti? What is the history there?
Well, it is a long and sad history of UN and U.S. intervention, even France and Canadian intervention in Haiti. We don't have right now the feeling of satisfaction after all these interventions. The last one is the UN one that started in 2004 after President Aristide went to exile, and it lasted 13 years.
So there is this UN mission in 2004 that Many Haitians believe brought a cholera outbreak to the country. There was also reports of sexual abuse by UN peacekeepers. So would Haitians welcome international peacekeeping support right now, or are people too suspicious?
Of course, you all know about the cholera outbreak that the UN peacekeepers brought to Haiti, but this situation has left Haitian very skeptical about any UN intervention in the future. You're not gonna find the civil society, the Haitian civil society, the organized groups requesting an intervention whatsoever.
What are you going to be looking for over the next few days and weeks? We started this conversation with you saying that things can unravel quickly.
We don't know. Like, what we are hoping for is for the actual people that are fighting for the power in Haiti right now, they can have a consensus to have a kind of a transition government so they can lead us to elections. Not this year, it's not going to happen this year, but maybe next year or the year after. That is what we are hoping for.
So elections in the next 2 years, you're saying that is the hope?
Yes, that is the hope. We don't think that this interim government will be able to mobilize the Haitian population to go to vote, because they can't resolve the security problem. The main problem for us right now is the security problem, the security issue. If we don't trust the government to organize to resolve the security issue, we're not going to trust them in organizing elections in Haiti.
What are people saying in this moment?
All eyes are right now on the assassination of the Haitian president. It's not on COVID. It's not on the food. It's not on the crisis that is going on. It's on the assassination of the president. Like, everyone wants to know who was behind the commando, who dealt with the people that came to Haiti, when, and there is kind of a mixed feeling, because it's not, we